Greetings yet again to each and all, those who still care and dare to listen, and a wicked welcome to Mythophrenia, where you find talks and texts by Gnostic teacher John Lash on a range of topics relevant to the Terma of Gaia awakening, the Sophianic view of life, planetary Tantra, and the Calico War Party. I am recording this talk in the early hours of the morning of October 14th, 2016, under the title, The Great Deception, and a subtitle might be Human Evil and Supernatural Powers. There is a line in the writings of the Russian author Dostoevsky that comes from the brothers Karamazov, perhaps, or the devils. Whatever the case, here is a close paraphrase to that line. God and the devil are fighting for the world, and their battleground is the human soul. That's pretty close to what Dostoevsky wrote. And it's a summation in one sentence of the problem of the Great Deception. It states the Great Deception, but it does not state it as if it were a deception. It states the Great Deception as if it were providing a solution to the Great Deception. One of the aims of this talk is to unravel and unriddle your mind and to disabuse you of a notion that lurks in the minds of all human animals, to the extent that we have been conditioned, brainwashed, and programmed by religious doctrines coming from the three main Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The intention here is to disabuse you of that notion of the Great Deception, which leads you to believe that you are mastering that deception, when in fact you are ultimately and hopelessly caught in it. Now, of course, the Great Deception is a meme, is a term widely used by Christians. It would be fair to say that most Christians in Europe and certainly in America are familiar with this term, and they would understand it, I believe. That is to say, I believe I'm representing their viewpoint fairly and not mounting a straw man argument. They would agree that the Great Deception refers to the battle between Satan and God, with humanity caught in the middle. That's a pretty good way to sum it up. Others among you who may not be of a religious bent of mind, or who may have been brought up with that religious indoctrination, may have overcome it by now, and you may have, in rejecting religion and in rejecting what you perceive to be the invalid notions and claims of Judeo-Christian religion, you may have also discarded the notion of the Great Deception as something that is of no interest to you. I would advise you, if you fall into that category, to listen very closely to what's said in this talk. In the framework of comparative mythology, which encompasses all the world religions and is larger than the world religions, in the framework of comparative mythology, there are dominant themes, and there are a finite number of them. There are perhaps 15 or 20 dominant themes in the whole realm of comparative mythology. And what is comparative mythology? Well, it is the genre of human imagination. Myths are the products of human imagination. But as such, they are not by definition false. They are not by definition categorically fabrications of falsity, illusion, and superstition. No, not at all. The original term mythos in Greek simply means a story, a description of events that happened. So if I was living in Athens in the time of Socrates, and I went to get a haircut, and something happened on the way that was interesting, I got back home and I told my wife a mythos. I told her a story about what happened to me. So myths can be accurate descriptions of events that have happened in the course of human history, cosmical events, events that have happened in the biological evolution of the human species to the form that it presents today. In the vast framework of this mythology created by the human imagination as a natural expression of the imaginative powers of the species, there are, as I say, maybe 15 or 20 predominant and prevalent themes which are found almost everywhere in the world, in every culture, through every age of time. Mircea Eliade, who was a comparative mythologist living at the end of the 20th century, called these themes mythemes. In other words, he shortened the term mythological theme to mythemes. Now, whether or not you have been raised with religious indoctrination, and even if you would choose from a rational viewpoint to entirely dismiss the notion of divine intervention as superstitious nonsense, part of the absurdities of faith to which the human mind is subject, even if you were to do that, be assured you would be making a big mistake. Because as a product of human imagination, the myth theme of divine intervention implicates you deeply. It implicates you as a human creature endowed with that very power of imagination. So if you would care to know how your imagination works and how to use your imagination correctly, then you would do well to listen to this little discourse on divine intervention. It would be fair to say that it can be placed among the top 5 myth themes in the religious and spiritual and imaginative experience of the human species. Among the top 5. And who knows, it could even be the top. I would say the top myth theme is, of course, creation myth. How did we get to be here? This is a big question in the human mind. So probably number 1 in the top 5 would be the creation myth in all its variants through different cultures and epochs of time. The second would probably be the myth of anthropogenesis, particularly not just the creation of the world you inhabit, the planet, the cosmos, but the genesis of the human species itself. Madame Blavatsky, writing at the end of the 19th century, distinguished these 2 myth themes under the grandiose terms of cosmogenesis, and anthropogenesis. So let's say those are 1 and 2 of the top 5. 3 is most certainly the theme of divine intervention. Now it would be an entertaining and instructive exercise to put some of your time into looking into myths of divine intervention, making an inventory, as it were. Well, that is, of course, the job, if you will, the responsibility of a comparative mythologist, and it's not something that falls perhaps within the range of interest of ordinary people, of non-specialists. Nevertheless, it is entertaining to consider such an inventory. For example, you could look into Homer, and there in the Iliad you would see a scene where the goddess Athena actually appears on the battlefield at Troy, and she actually intervenes in the war, the hand-to-hand, brutal hand-to-hand fighting that is taking place between the Trojans and the Greeks. And that's an example from Homer, from pagan folklore, of divine intervention. Athena on the battlefield. Then if you were to skip over to the Bible and riffle through the pages of Genesis, there you would find a scene, a remarkable scene, a chilling scene, a unique scene, picturing an event in the life of the biblical patriarch Abraham. It so happened that when Abraham arrived at a place called the Grove of Mamre, which is identified with Jerusalem, close by to Jerusalem, a modern-day city, he felt drowsy and fell into a kind of a stupor, leaning against a tree. And when he woke up, there were 3 figures standing in front of him. Tall, gaunt figures, especially the central figure, with a human figure, or humanoid, with 2 angelic type guardians or accomplices on each side of him. And this tall, gaunt figure, who is actually pictured in sculpture on the wall of the Chartres Cathedral in France, was called Melchizedek. That name is a mixture, a hybrid of a Sumerian root Hebrew word, Zadik, meaning righteous, and a Akkadian word, Melchi, meaning prince. So Melchizedek is the prince of righteousness. Melchizedek is a supernatural being who appears before Abraham in the Grove of Mamre. And what does Melchizedek do in this narrative, in this myth? This is a myth, presumably, that describes events that actually happened. Not all myths do, by the way. Some myths are lies. Some myths are pure deceits. But let's, for the benefit of the doubt, say that this myth, this story from Genesis, described an event that actually happened. Well, that event was most certainly a notable example of divine intervention. And what happened at that moment was that Melchizedek assigned to Abraham and his descendants a mission. So a mission came from a divine or supernatural power, and in that moment, the patriarch Abraham, father of the 3 Abrahamic religions, received his orders, as it were. So, the mission of the Abrahamic peoples, as they live today by the book, those people of the book, whether they be Jews who still believe in God. There are many atheistic Jews. Christians or Muslims, they all have their spiritual heritage from this event, from the divine intervention of Melchizedek. This event pertains vividly to events that are unfolding in the world today. That mythological incident is profoundly connected with historical events that have been unfolding in the world on the planetary scale since about 1850. This is a point to be considered again later in this talk. Now, how about Buddhism? Well, is there an example of divine intervention in Buddhism? Well, there most certainly is. As the story goes, the Buddhist legend, which is a myth, a creation of human imagination, which may or may not describe an event that actually happened. Again, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. The legend says that when Gautama, or Prince Siddhartha, the historical Buddha who lived around 550 BC, was very, very close to enlightenment, was on the verge of achieving total enlightenment with the capacity to enter nirvana, sitting under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, just on the threshold of that momentous realization, he was confronted with demonic forces. That is to say, the satanic-like power called Mara, M-A-R-A, and all the hordes and demons in the company of Mara. They approached Siddhartha, who was not yet Buddha, because he had not yet entered full enlightenment, and they forced themselves upon him in such a way that they could have perhaps prevented him from taking that final step and becoming Buddha. But at that moment, the legend says, there was an act of divine intervention. So here is an account of that incident from the Tantric Conversion, Part 1, on metahistory.org. Quote, various biographies describe how the earth goddess, called Prithivi, or Stavera, intervened to dispel the illusions of Mara, leaving Shakyamuni in the perfect concentration required to attain enlightenment. There came a moment of crucial confrontation. Mara claimed that the Indian prince had nothing to show for his alleged superlative acts of generosity, not a single witness to attest that he, the man who would be a Buddha, had benefited humanity in any way. In other words, Mara accused Shakyamuni of being a narcissist, hung up in a self-centered quest for liberation. Shakyamuni, being aware of the presence of the earth goddess to support him, replied to this challenge by these words, "Let this great and solid earth be my witness." And by a movement of his hand, which is called the Bhumi Sparsa Mudra, the gesture of touching the earth, he affirmed the act of divine intervention that occurred at that moment. Just think of it. How many Buddhists in the world today know this? How many Buddhists know that the enlightenment of the Buddha might well not have happened had it not been for the intervention of Stavera, which is spelled S-T-H-A-V-A-R-A, who is identified flagrantly as the goddess of the earth. Stavera means immobile, solid, like the earth. How many Buddhists know that the Buddha owes his enlightenment to the support of the goddess of the earth? But that is an act of divine intervention. Incidentally, the name Stavera, it's a Sanskrit word, is a very popular name for girls in India today. Similar to the popularity of the name Sophia for girls. That is, in fact, the most popular name chosen by parents today for a child born as a female. So moving on in this little inventory, it won't be a complete one, but you can see it's varied. And each of these stories in its own way is quite engaging. Moving on to say, the illumination of St. Paul on the road to Damascus. Well, he was not St. Paul at the time. He was Saul of Tarsus. And he was in fact a bounty hunter supported by the Romans who was heading to Damascus to see if he could capture some insurgents, Jewish insurgents, who belonged to a certain cell of the Zadokite cult. Now, interestingly, the Zadokite cult was founded on the figure of Melchizedek. Remember, Melchizedek, Zedek, Zadok, Sadik, this Semite Hebrew root means righteous, better than everyone else, the perfected, if you will. Well, interesting continuity here between the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the Old Testament, Melchizedek initiates Abraham into his mission, which produces the Hebrew people, the Hebrew religion. And then in the New Testament, Saul of Tarsus has an experience of illumination on the road to Damascus, which converts him into the zealous apostle of the new religion of Christianity. Right? And it's a remarkable fact, and a very great fact, which you will find carefully detailed in Not in His Image, that St. Paul, as he came to be known, writing in Romans, actually declares that Melchizedek is the power behind Christ. Now, the word Christ is not a name, but just a title. It means the anointed one. It comes from the Greek verb Christein, which means to anoint, which is a version of the Hebrew word, a translation of the Hebrew word Messiah. Messiah means the anointed one. Christos means the anointed one. It's a title, like king or prince. And amazingly, and how many Christians actually know this? Few, I would say. Amazingly, the man who brought Christianity to the level of a world religion declared that Christ, the anointed, really gets his power from the anointer who is behind him. The supernatural power of Melchizedek supports the power of Christ in the form of the flesh and blood Messiah. So there's a double aspect to the intervention story here. The hybrid, the human-divine hybrid, Jesus Christ, according to Christian myth, is on the one hand the only begotten Son of God, therefore an intervention by virgin birth into the human world, but also, at the same time, he is only Christ, and he has the power of Christ by way of an even higher supernatural power, which is Melchizedek. It's described as a being without generation, having no parents. And this is really the heart of Christian mythology, is an intervention scenario. You may be getting the picture by now that in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the idea of divine intervention is always connected with the idea of a savior or Messiah figure. All right then, moving on to complete this little inventory, to round it off. Wouldn't be complete without a look at Islam. Now, Islam is a bit of an aberration. It's a bit of an anomaly in Islam. when it comes to the notion of divine intervention. Now, certainly, the Prophet Muhammad was said to have lived, in the 7th century, is considered, traditionally to have been sent by God, God's messenger. The messenger comes from the person who sends the messenger. And so the very presence of this individual in the world could be considered as an act of divine intervention. And I'm sure that many Muslims regard it as such. Also, it's really important to know when you consider Islam that it's not merely based on the Quran, which is written in 2 parts. The earlier part written in Mecca and the later part written in Medina, which are contradictory to each other in certain ways. But the doctrine of Islam is equally based on 2 other writings. One of them is the Hadith, or the tradition of commentaries upon the Quran and upon the life of Muhammad. And the third is the biography, or the life of Muhammad itself, which is called the Sirah. And sometimes you will hear the expression the Sunnah. The Sunnah means the supreme example, the paramount example. So the Sunnah of Muhammad is, in a way, the paramount example of what a good human being should be in the Islamic faith. It is as important for Muslims to emulate the model of behavior and attitude of Muhammad down to the smallest detail as it is to follow the writings in the Quran. And so in the West you have Thomas A. Kempis having written the Imitatio Christi, the Imitation of Christ. You find in some religious orders in the West an attempt to imitate or emulate the life of Christ down to the point of masochistic suffering and self-flagellation and so forth. Well, likewise, the Sunnah of Muhammad represents the imperative for Muslims to behave exactly in the way Muhammad behaved. And if you don't, you're not really a true Muslim. Now, regarding Muhammad as a figure of divine intervention is less important than regarding him as an ideal model of humanity. Take that one on board for a moment. The divine intervention operating in Islam is a transmogrification. Is that a word? I think so. It's a mutation of the Messiah that emerged through Melchizedek in ancient Judaism, the upscaling and mutation of that Messiah in the figure of the human divine hybrid Jesus Christ, and then again another mutation. And the odd thing about the Islamic mutation, and this is a point of imperative importance for seeing the reality of divine intervention in the world today. The strange thing about Islam is that the intervention to be achieved by Islam is underway as a historical, social, and political event on this planet. It is most certainly an event of conquest and submission, because Islam means submission. And so, it could be said, and this might be the first time that the proposition has been formulated in just this manner, that the interventionist factor of Islam is not necessarily a person such as Muhammad, or not even the Mahdi, who is the future prophet prophesied to come in Islam. No, it is actually a political ideology. What makes Islam so powerful is that it is really a political ideology disguised as a religion. And the political ideology is the instrument and agency of divine intervention. And to put a name on that political ideology, it is Sharia law. So these are a number of cases. There could be more. I just throw out a few hints. There have been, since 1850, a number of presumed or supposed messiahs who would be regarded as agents of divine intervention. A notable one that occurred in the late 19th century was Baha'u'llah, who was the founder of the Baha'i religion. Have you ever heard of Baha'i? That was an example of a presumed messianic intervention. Then, of course, there is the famous story of Jenu Krishnamurti, who was a young Hindu Brahmin boy, groomed by the leaders of the Theosophical Society, most specifically Ani Besant and Leadbeater, to be the world teacher, to be the Maitreya. The Maitreya. Who's the Maitreya? Well, in Buddhist legend, the Maitreya is the future Buddha, the Buddha to come after the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni or Siddhartha. And so Krishnamurti was put up by these people. Charles Leadbeater was his name, I believe, and Ani Besant, to be foisted on the world as the Maitreya. And very famously, Krishnamurti refused that role and had a massive mental breakdown that lasted many years and retreated from the world. And when he returned, he became a kind of anti-guru who had, now and then, some brilliant things to say about spiritual practices. And then you could also throw in, Sai Baba or, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, any number of Indian gurus. And so the beat goes on. Now at this point, half an hour into this talk, let's turn our attention away from this entertaining inventory to 2 points raised in the essay, Her Name is Silence. First point is that the first point is presented in this way, okay? It's presented as a working proposition, not presented as a dogma or something to shove down your throat or something for you to be spoon-fed. It's a working proposition. Let's suppose that were an event of divine intervention to be happening right now on this planet. We ourselves, who would be witnesses to that event, are in a position to define the elements of that event, to define the components of that divine intervention. And the essay, Her Name is Silence, proposes initially 2 features. The act of divine intervention happening now could be interactive. It's the first characteristic. And the second characteristic, which is novel, really novel, is that the divine intervention would be adversarial. That is to say, it would come into the world in such a way that it presented the possibility to confront and overcome another intervention. So what Her Name is Silence is trying to say, which you might take note, has not been said before, is that there is an intervention underway on this planet. But it is not a divine intervention. It is a demonic intervention. And were there to occur a genuine divine intervention, then it would require at the outset, perhaps more, but at the very outset, at the minimum, it would require first direct, proactive interactivity with human beings, and second, it would require an adversarial stance toward the intervention that is already underway. So what's the proposal here? If you want to think about divine intervention at all, then think about it beginning always with this notion. There is an act of demonic intervention operating on the planet Earth in demonstrable ways in the social life of humanity, in the social order of the world. There is a process resulting from a demonic intervention. And at the same time, counteracting that, there is a truly divine intervention. The second kind of intervention was predicted, in a sense, or prefigured, is perhaps a better word, was prefigured in the Gnostic writings under the obscure notion of correction. Sophia's correction is the divine intervention. The demonic intervention is actually a satanic plan to take down humanity. That satanic plan, that satanic agenda, has its operatives. It has its executive order, its executive level of power. And it has its many minions and those in the ranks who serve it. You cannot possibly have a clear view of the divine intervention that could take place in the world today unless you frame it in these novel conditions, and unless you start with the understanding that it is there is an adversarial situation, and that there is a polarity. That polarity, however, is not the polarity of good and evil. Dostoevsky was wrong. He was caught in the great deception, even though he believed he was exposing it. Well, that is one of the characteristics of those who are caught in the great deception. You know they are really caught in it when they're telling you that they are exposing it. Now, I'm not exposing the great deception. I'm demolishing it entirely. Demolishing that concept in order to clear the way for an entirely different view of what divine intervention might be. Well, I'm speaking right now, this evening, at this point in this talk. I can absolutely assure you of something that I will be repeating from time to time in the future. The great deception of which Christians would warn us is the self-deception of Christians in the illusion of good versus evil. Anyone caught in the illusion of good versus evil is trapped in the great deception. And from within that trap, they may have remarkable insights about certain workings of evil in the world. They may even have certain glimpses of genuine supernatural powers operating in the world. But all of it to no avail. Because as long as someone is suffering in the self-deception of illusions about good versus evil, they can never resolve the problem of the great deception. And I have no intention to resolve it. I don't need to resolve it because I am not caught in the self-deception of the great deception. Therefore, I have nothing to resolve. Speaking as a Gnostic, however, I have an entirely novel, palpable, and demonstrable model, if you will, of divine intervention to offer and to teach. Happily, that teaching, that instruction, is not complicated. It's really simple. The problem is very complicated, and that's what makes it a problem to some degree. But the solution is simple. To begin to establish your mind in the solution, consider this picture. God on one side, Satan and all the demonic powers and the devil and the Antichrist on the other side, and humanity in the middle. What's humanity doing in the middle? It's being tested. It's being tested by Satan. Obviously, in the book of Job, the situation is exactly so. Yahweh, the male-only creator God, sends Satan, Shaitan, to test Job, to tempt and to test. So, those who think they're exposing the great deception say, yeah, look, there's humanity caught in the middle between the devil and God, and the devil or Satan is testing us. This is entirely wrong. This syntax, this description, is the product of human dementia and paranoia that has been centuries in the making. It is an entirely fabricated scenario of the psychosis of the human mind feeding on its own fears of the supernatural without a clear sense of what the supernatural really is. So Dostoevsky was wrong. And here is the picture to replace this other picture. There are three factors in the Gnostic model of divine intervention, in the Gnostic model of the human situation, considered theologically, if you will. On the one side, there is humanity, the human species, as a singular entity, considered as a singular entity. If you regard yourself as being a member of the human species, bear in mind that there are some human animals who don't so regard themselves. This is an issue that comes up in this discourse eventually. So, the three factors are humanity, the human species, called by the Gnostics the anthropos, so called the anthropine species. And over there on the other side is Sophia, the mother of the species. She is not only the aeonic mother of the species, according to the Gnostic creation myth, if you will, the fallen goddess scenario, but she is at the same time the very embodiment of this planet. She is a star goddess from the galactic level who designed and conceived the human species before the earth was created, and then she turned into the earth to become the setting where humanity would arise. The Gnostics present a formula of three S's for the Aeon Sophia, the wisdom goddess. S, she is the source of humanity, the creator, designer of the human genome. S, her story is the story of humanity and the earth. And the third S, she is the setting of the experiment in which humanity finds itself. Source, story, and setting. So those are the two factors. There's humanity, there's you, a human creature. Apply the model. Apply the model to any day of your life. Walk outside. Stand in the doorway of your house. Go stand in a field. Go stand by a river. near the mountains, under the night sky. You are a human animal looking at the mother who created you in her planetary form. So what is the third factor? Well, the third factor, quite simply, is whatever stands between you and her. Whatever stands between you and your source. The enemies of humanity and the enemies of Sophia are in the middle, not humanity itself. This is the corrected view of the triadic version of the polarity of good versus evil. But am I saying anything about good versus evil? No. Humanity, let's say, has goodness in it. The goddess is only goodness. And between humanity and the goddess, standing in the middle, with the intention to harm and destroy both the earth and the human species, are the enemies of humanity. The psychopaths. Let's just call them the psychopaths. So the battle is against the psychopaths. Humanity has a role to play in the battle against the psychopaths, and Sophia herself has a role to play in the battle against the psychopaths. And there is the fourth element of novelty in the divine intervention scenario that follows the Gnostic lead of Sophia's correction. The fourth factor, that Sophia takes action against the psychopaths in her way. And ideally, her action would be recognized and appreciated by her witnesses among the human species. And they in turn take action against the psychopaths and the enemies of life. The battle is not the human soul with Satan over there and God over there. No. The battle is the social order on this planet. That's the battleground. The social order on this planet is the battleground. And it's not God versus Satan. It's humanity and Sophia versus the enemies of life. The picture could not be more clear. It's the only picture you ever need to have to see what is actually happening and how this battle is set up and how divine intervention plays into the overall scenario. Now, clearly this talk and the related essay, Her Name is Silence, are ways to set up an approach. They are part of the setup. Another part of the setup is the conversation, the interview with Lisa Harrison on divine intervention. These talks and these texts form a unit. The purpose of this unit is to set up your minds so that you know what you can do with your minds in this situation. For instance, so that you know how you yourself can recognize and engage the process of Sophia's correction. Now this setup, which is beginning here and now in October of 2016, will not require a lot of time. The problem is complicated, and those who causing the problem deliberately, those human animals who are up to no good and are causing the problem deliberately, they know that. And they want to make it as complicated as it can be. But the solution is simple. And you don't need to know and master all the complications of the problem to go to solution. So the setup in these current talks in Mythophrenia is to take you straight to solution. on the fast track as rapidly as possible and as lucidly as possible, following the Gnostic method and remaining within the framework of the sacred narrative of the mysteries, the fallen goddess scenario. All the clues in the world don't count if you don't know what crime has been committed. All the insights in the world, all the knowledge, all the information, all the disclosures regarding the way the psychopaths are working don't count if you don't know the master narrative of the human story. And if you're not interested in that master narrative, and it doesn't engage you for some reason or another, fine. Nobody's going to argue with you or persuade you there. Truth is that those individuals who encounter that narrative, the fallen goddess scenario, the myth of the wisdom goddess, fall in love with it. They are convinced by the beauty and the elegance and the complexity and depth of that story. They are enthralled by the power of the story. And they are compelled to bring their lives into the story so that they realize that without the story they don't have a life on their own. And then they take the steps, depending on their disposition and talent. Each and every person takes the steps to interact with the plot. If there are individuals who have no inclination to do that, that's no problem. Those who are involved in her story, who love it and are committed to it, regard those other people as extras. They're like extras in a movie. There's a big movie going on this planet, and the stars of the movie know the plot. They know the narrative. They know the trajectory of the whole story of the movie, and they know that the movie is open-ended, that the final conclusion of it has not been written or decided, but that the conclusion of the movie is being decided as the movie is being shot. And anyone who doesn't know that is just an extra on the set. Now, to return to the main theme of divine intervention and to round off this talk, it would be helpful to address some confusion that most certainly arose due to things I said in the interview with Lisa Harrison, due to a lack of precision and consistency in what I said. For instance, at some moments I seem to say, well, there is nothing evil in the supernatural, the Nahual. And then at other moments I seem to say, yes, there are supernatural forces of evil attacking humanity. Well, get it straight, John. I mean, give it to us one way or the other. You're flatly contradicting yourself here. No, I'm not contradicting myself. I just did not speak on that occasion with sufficient precision. Here comes the precision. The demonic intervention on this planet is due to one particular alien species, which can be regarded as a satanic species because of the definition of the word satanic, which means working against, adversary. There is one supernatural, extraterrestrial, non-human adversary to the human race. One. Now you might ask, well, wait a minute, why only one? And I would reply by saying, one is all it takes. And if you can't handle one, then how are you going to handle more than one? The Gnostics warned of this extraterrestrial alien parasitical species called archons. They exist in the solar system. Their appearance in the cosmos at large is explained in the fallen goddess scenario. It's in the narrative. If you want to know who the archons are, how they came to be due to an anomaly, then go read the narrative. There is no other explanation that tells you how the archons originate. Is there? Is there? And this explanation, coming from the Gnostic masters of the mystery schools, tells you the truth about the origin of the archons, who they are, how they operate, what are their motives, what are their appearances, everything you want to know. And that intel is developing as I speak. It's the fundamental and imperative primary intel that you use to base your learning process on. You have to base your learning process on truth, on valid and verifiable intel. Such intel has been given in the Gnostic teachings and restored by the living Gnostics of our time. In the cause of greater precision, you will find in the essay, Her Name is Silence, a characterization of two acts of intervention. One of them is the intervention through the archons, which has produced initially the Zadokite movement within Judaic religion, inspired and guided by the supernatural figure of Melchizedek, and coming down into the Jewish dream of world domination, which combines with the Islamic dream of world submission. You can't have domination, which is the Jewish part, without submission, which is the Islamic part. The term for that is the Jewish Islamic fix. The Jewish Islamic fix is the evidence and instrument of the archontic intervention, and that should not be called a divine intervention, because it is only a pretended divine intervention. It's actually a demonic intervention. Those through the ages in the past, and today very clearly in Islam, who appeal to theocracy, would have you believe that this archontic demonic intervention is actually divine. I certainly misspoke, or I spoke without sufficient precision, if I implied that it was a divine intervention at the same level as the divine intervention of Sophia's correction. No. So here is the simplific syntax. There is a demonic intervention underway stemming from the archontic intrusion into human life on earth. And there is a genuine act of divine intervention underway. Sophia's correction, as prefigured or hinted in the Gnostic materials. That is the entire picture. That is all you have to know. That is where you put your entire intention. That model, that paradigm, is not a paradigm of good versus evil, although it can easily be distorted into one if you merely squint your eyes. I compel you not to squint your eyes. Do not squint and make it into a good versus evil scenario. Even the Gnostics did not say anywhere in the Greek Coptic materials that the archons are evil. This is really important. The archons themselves, as an extraterrestrial mind parasite species, are not evil. They are not any more evil than a pit of vipers or killer ants or locusts are evil. They are not evil. They are an expression of the natural order of the extraterrestrial cosmos and of the terrestrial cosmos. Killer bees are not evil. So what is evil? What is evil is the human component of behavior that conforms to the influence and follows the influence of the archontic intrusion. Human evil has a certain element of supernatural power behind it, or had, until September 2014. Human evil is what you want to look at. Human evil is what you want to know. Human evil is the mirror of human goodness. When you look at the evil, you see the opportunity to show your own goodness and your honor and your courage and your love and your commitment, and above all else, above and beyond all else, the purity and necessity of your hate. The profile of the archons from the Nag Hammadi writings is eminently clear. You find, for example, in the longest work and one of the more difficult works, the Apocryphon of John, which can be found in 4 versions in the surviving materials, an explicit description that the archons feed on fear and deceit. That is evil, yes, but it is not evil in the sense of the emanation of a cosmic satanic power of evil out of the darkness of the universe into the human world. That is wrong. The Gnostics were precise in saying that the archons promote error and deception in the human mind. And when human beings enact that deception as proxies to the archons, then you have evil. But it is only human evil, and the cure for it is a human cure, and hate is a very big component in that cure. Hate is the venom of the cure to human evil. And as Paracelsus famously said, the cure is in the dose. There is much to be said in the genre of mythophrenia about hate, about the sacred purpose of violence in the human species, and about the purity of hate and the ethical necessity of hate. But those are instructions that belong to the mission of the Maitreya, and they are better left to another and separate exposition. For now, in concluding, how about a summary of the actors in the drama of divine intervention? This talk began with an inventory, partial inventory, very cursory inventory of some examples of divine intervention. Since it is the intention of the Gnostic teacher to take you to source and take you to solution, it is also the pleasure of the Gnostic teacher to give you the tools to navigate to solution. And these are conceptual tools and ideas. And there is a very limited number of them. They are not a lot. But they are essential, and you cannot leave out any single one. And these tools that lead to solution, that orient you to solution, have to be mastered in your learning process. In the process of taking Gnostic instruction, you have to master these components. The object of talks and texts in Misophonia will be to set it all out for you. It can all be set out on a table, on a small table. The solution is simple, elegant, beautiful, thrilling beyond your wildest imagination. The problem is complicated, and part of your assignment, mission impossible, no, mission totally possible. Part of your assignment is don't get caught in the complications. Don't go running down rabbit holes. You are not terriers. You are human creatures. You are anthropines. You do not live in burrows and run down rabbit holes. So, in conclusion, here's a list of actors in the playbook of the narrative of divine intervention. The narrative of human evil and supernatural powers has 11 active components or agencies in it. 11 and 11 only. When you have a clear and simplific, Gnostically based comprehension of these 11 factors, you have great power. You have the power of your own mind to engage in something beyond your mind. Right now, I'm merely going to list them and then pick up that list in subsequent talks and texts. 1. Satan. 2. Lucifer. 3. The Antichrist. 4. The great beast, Tomegatherion, of the book of Revelation. And 5, the lesser beast of the book of Revelation. 6, the legion of demonic phantoms produced by human paranoia. 7, the archons. That would be the extraterrestrial, cyborg type, parasitical intruders described in Gnostic writings. 8, the human proxies of the archons. That is to say, those who enact, those who are actually under the power of the archons, which is a supernatural demonic power, and from that captivation perpetrate evil in the human world. But it is still human evil. It is still human evil and can be defeated as such. And in defeating the human evil of the proxies of the archons, who are called the Zads, or Zadokites, then the archons themselves are defeated. 9, the Aeonic Mother, the Aeon Sophia, the planetary animal mother, the wisdom goddess. 10, humanity itself, the anthropos, the anthropine species. And 11, the Maitreya, which, I might add, is a name in Sanskrit from the root Maitri, meaning friendship. So the Maitreya can be translated as benevolent friend, one who comes to you in friendship, or from friendship, possibly. You know, you could encounter the Maitreya any day without knowing it. Maitreya might not necessarily stand there in front of you in a halo or wearing a badge that says, "Hello, I am the Maitreya, the future Buddha, and I'm here now." You could ask yourself when you're standing in front of a stranger, and the Maitreya has a lot to do with standing with strangers. When you stand in front of a stranger, well, does this other human creature come to me from friendship? That is to say, does he or she come from a spirit of friendship, of benevolence, of kindness, of mutual aid? And if the answer is yes, well, there's a possibility that that other human creature could be the Maitreya. So consider that while you're having breakfast tomorrow morning. And something else that you might do is go to the printable material that accompanies this talk and print out the list of 11 items and put it somewhere where you see it all the time. And when you look at it, tell yourself this: I hold the intention to master this role of actors in the drama of human evil and supernatural powers. And look at it again and again and again and review it continually. And in that way, come to learn and know who these actors are and know how to speak of them out of your own resources, out of your own innate knowing. The unique and delightful opportunity of Gnostic instruction, which it is both a pleasure and a privilege to give and to receive, is this: it teaches you how to know all that you can know with the capacity of your mind at the genius level. Such is the dimension of instruction now coming to you through mythophrenia. So finally, to conclude very briefly, in 3 minutes, one further point of clarification, one further point of simplific instruction. Return to that picture, always go back to that picture of the triadic paradigm of polarity. The human species at one pole, the aeons of fire at the other pole, and between them, the psychopaths and the enemies of life. As you consider that model, if you will, that structure, consider this as well. In her divine intervention, which is called her correction or diorthosis, the aeons of fire acts primarily in 2 ways. She acts toward or upon the archons, and she acts toward or upon humanity itself. Can you see that? So, Gnostic instruction gives you the opportunity not to speculate, not to wonder, not to guess, not to fantasize, but to actually know and prove how Sophia acts toward the archons. This is knowable. And likewise, how she acts or reaches toward humanity in the process of her correction. The correction of the aeons of fire is a complete novelty. It is unlike any other scenario of divine intervention that has been imagined, predicted, prophesied. It can only be known as a novelty, and it can only be actualized by the mother herself as a novelty. It is her novelty. It is her play. It is her correction. And she plays it as she likes. She plays it in a way that delights her. So, just remember the concluding remark in the interview with Lisa Harrison. The one single factor that has never before been considered in any scenario of divine intervention is humor. Does the wisdom goddess have a sense of humor? Does she have a sense of humor? Well, I guess you would know that when it hits you and when you see it in action.